A man in a worn-out janitor's uniform stands outside a locked executive boardroom. Inside, a CEO is moments away from signing a deal worth billions. No one notices a janitor until he does the unthinkable. What happens next will redefine courage, loyalty, and the true meaning of second chances. Before we dive into this unbelievable story, make sure to subscribe, hit the like button, and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what happens next. The Invisible Man. The fluorescent lights flicker to life one by one as Martin Riggs pushes mop bucket down the long, empty hallway of Summit Dynamics' 42nd floor. It was 4:47 a.m., early even for him. But Martin liked the quiet. The way the city stretched awake beneath the floor-to-ceiling windows. The hum of the building settling into another day. 12 years of this routine, and not once had anyone in a suit notice him. That was fine. He preferred it that way. His knees ached as he bent to wipe a coffee stain off the marble tiles. Some executive's late-night caffeine fix. The doctors had warned him about the arthritis years ago, back when Carla was still alive. "You're not as young as you think, Marty," she'd say, rubbing his shoulders after a long shift. He could almost hear her voice now, soft and teasing. A sharp pain shot through his wrist as he wrung out the mop. He ignored it. At 54, Martin was used to the aches, used to the way people looked right through him, like he was part of the furniture. The janitor, the ghost, the man who emptied trash cans and scrubbed toilets while the real players made decisions that shaped lives. He rounded the corner toward the executive wing, the only part of the floor with carpet so plush his sneakers sank into it. The boardroom doors were usually locked at this hour, but today they stood slightly ajar. A sliver of light spilled into the hallway, and then he heard it. "You're outvoted, Daniel. The papers get signed at 8 a.m. Martin froze. That voice, raspy, impatient, belonged to Richard Veldin, chairman of the board. A deeper voice fired back. "You're rushing this. We haven't even seen the full employee impact report." Daniel Kressler, the CO. Martin shouldn't be listening. He knew that, but his feet stayed rooted to the spot. "The numbers don't lie," Richard snapped. 4.2 billion. That's what's on the table. You really want to explain to shareholders why we walked away. A folder slammed onto a table. "You're talking about people's lives, Richard, not just numbers." Martin's grip tightened on the mop handle. A merger. Layoffs. He'd seen it before, back in Ohio, when the plant shut down. Carla had worked there for 23 years. They gave her 6 weeks severance. 6 weeks, and then the cancer diagnosis came. His throat tightened. A shadow moved toward the door. Martin jerked back, heart hammering, but the argument inside raged on. "You think I don't know what this looks like?" Daniel's voice dropped, raw. "My father built this company on loyalty. You're tearing it apart." "Sentiment doesn't pay dividends," Richard scoffed. "Sign the damn papers." A chair scraped. Footsteps. Martin scrambled backward just as the door swung open. Richard stormed out, his tailored suit crisp, his face flushed with victory. He didn't even glance at the janitor hovering in the shadows. But someone else did. From inside the boardroom, Daniel Kressler stood silhouetted against the skyline, his tie loose, his expression hollow. For a split second, his eyes locked onto Martin's. Recognition flickered. Then it was gone. The door clicked shut. Martin exhaled. His hands trembled. Carla's voice echoed in his head. Clear as the day she'd squeeze his hand in that hospital bed. "The right thing is never easy, Marty, but it's always worth it." Somewhere down the hall, an elevator dinged. Martin Riggs, the Invisible Man, made a decision. The interruption. The elevator door slid shut behind Richard Veldin, leaving the hallway in silence. Martin stood frozen, the mop still clenched in his hands, his pulse roaring in his ears. He should walk away, finish his shift, pretend he never heard a thing. But Carla's voice whispered again. Worth it. He took a step toward the boardroom. Then another. The polished oak door loomed in front of him. He raised his knuckles, hesitated, then knocked, once firm. Silence. Then, sharp and irritated. "What?" Martin pushed the door open. The room smelled of expensive leather and stale coffee. Daniel Kressler sat slumped at the head of the table, a fountain pen twirling between his fingers, a stack of contracts spread before him. His head snapped up at the intrusion, his sharp blue eyes narrowing. "Who let you in here?" Martin swallowed. His uniform, stained with bleach and sweat, suddenly felt like a costume. I cleaned this floor, sir." Daniel's jaw tightened. And the words lodged in Martin's throat. He'd rehearsed nothing. No speech. No plan. Just the image of Carla's old co-workers, standing in line at the unemployment office. "Don't sign those papers," he blurted. Daniel went very still. A clock ticked somewhere. Outside, the first streaks of dawn painted the skyline pink. "Excuse me?" Daniel's voice was dangerously quiet. Martin's palms slicked with sweat. "The merger. I was outside and you were eavesdropping." Daniel stood, his chair scraping back. "Do you have any idea what you were?" "They're lying to you." The words tumbled out now, reckless. "About the layoffs. It's not just a few positions. It's hundreds, maybe thousands." Daniel's expression flickered. Doubt, then suspicion. "How would you know that?" Martin hesitated. He had no proof, just a lifetime of recognizing the sound of a lie. "Because I've seen it before," he said quietly. "Companies always say it's just business, until it's your business." For a long moment, Daniel just stared at him. Then, to Martin's shock, he sank back into his chair, ran a hand over his face. "You're not the first person to tell me that today," he muttered. A door creaked behind them. Martin spun. A security guard, broad-shouldered, name tag reading Hernandez, stood in the doorway, his brow furrowed. "Everything okay in here, Mr. Kressler?" Daniel's gaze cut to Martin. A silent question. Martin braced for the dismissal. They escorted him out. But Hernandez didn't move. His eyes darted to the contracts on the table, then back to Martin. "You heard about the layoffs too?" he asked low. Daniel stiffened. "You knew?" Hernandez's jaw worked. "Rumors. They're saying the Chicago plant's first to go." His voice cracked. "My brother works there." The air left the room. Daniel looked down at the papers. The signature line, blank. Martin saw the exact second it hit him. The weight, the betrayal. "They never show me those numbers," Daniel said softly. Hernandez stepped forward. "Sir, please." A phone buzzed on the table. Daniel ignored it. Outside, the city woke up. Car horns, sirens, the distant rumble of the L train. Martin watched as Daniel Kressler, CEO of Summit Dynamics, did something no one expected. He pushed the contracts away. "Get me the real reports," he said. "Everything they didn't want me to see." Hernandez nodded, already reaching for his radio. Daniel turned to Martin. "What's your name?" Martin Riggs." "Well, Martin Riggs," Daniel said, "you just cost this company $4 billion. A beat, then the ghost of a smile. "Thank you." The phone buzzed again. Richard's name flashed on the screen. Daniel silenced it. "Now," he said, rolling up his sleeves, "let's see what else they're hiding." The fallout. The elevator doors slid shut, sealing Martin and Daniel inside the sterile, mirror box as it descended toward the parking garage. The CEO hadn't said a word since they'd left the boardroom, his jaw set like stone, his fingers tapping an erratic rhythm against his thigh. Martin kept his eyes fixed on the floor numbers blinking above the door, his stomach twisting with every drop in altitude. What the hell am I doing? He was a janitor. He mopped floors. He unclogged toilets. He didn't storm out of high-stakes corporate meetings with disgraced CEOs. Yet here he was, standing shoulder to shoulder with a man who, until 20 minutes ago, hadn't known his name. The elevator dinged. Underground. Daniel strode out first, his polished Oxfords clicking against the concrete. Martin followed, his sneakers squeaking in contrast. The garage was nearly empty at this hour, just a few luxury cars scattered like abandoned chess pieces. Daniel beelined for a sleek black Audi, yanked open the passenger door, and fixed Martin with a look that brooked no argument. "Get in." Martin hesitated. "Where are we?" "Just get in the damn car, Riggs." The Audi's engine roared to life. vibrating through Martin's bones as Daniel peeled out of the garage and into the Chicago morning. Rain had started to fall, slicking the streets with reflections of neon and steel. Daniel drove like a man possessed, weaving through traffic, his knuckles white on the wheel. "They played me," he said suddenly, voice raw. "They've been playing me for months." Martin stayed silent. He learned long ago that when people in power started talking, the smartest thing to do was listen. Daniel's phone buzzed in the console for the 10th time. He ignored it. "You know how my father started Summit?" Martin shook his head. "Selling auto parts out of garage in Gary, Indiana. Built it into this." A bitter laugh. "And now it's just a number on a spreadsheet to those vultures." The car swerved onto Lakeshore Drive, the skyline shrinking in the rear view. Martin gripped the door handle. "Where are we going?" Daniel's eyes stayed fixed on the road. "Somewhere they won't think to look." 20 minutes later, the Audi rolled to a stop outside a weathered brick diner on the south side. Maggie's, the flickering sign read. The kind of place with duct tape booths and coffee strong enough to strip paint. Daniel killed the engine. For the first time since they left the tower, he looked uncertain. "My dad used to bring me here after Little League games." He exhaled. "Haven't been back in years." The bell above the door jingled as they entered. A few grizzled regulars glanced up from their eggs, then quickly looked away. Too early for curiosity. They slid into a corner booth. Daniel ordered 2 black coffees without asking. When the waitress left, he leaned forward, elbows on the sticky table. "Why'd you do it?" Martin blinked. "Do what?" "Risk your job. Walk into that room." Daniel's gaze was unnervingly direct. "You had to know I could have had you fired." The coffee arrived. Martin wrapped his hands around the mug, letting the heat seep into his aching joints. "My wife," he said finally. "Carla. She worked at a plant that got bought out. They promised everyone would keep their jobs. 3 months later, the whole place was shuttered." He swallowed. "She got sick right after. Stress, the doctor said. Like that's a real diagnosis." Daniel's face did something complicated. "I'm sorry," he said quiet. Martin shrugged. "Not your fault." "Isn't it?" Daniel's thumb traced a crack in the porcelain. "I sat in that boardroom. I saw the numbers. I just didn't look hard enough." Silence settled between them. Outside, a garbage truck groaned past. Daniel's phone buzzed again. This time, he glanced at it. His mouth tightened. "Richards called an emergency vote. They're removing me as CEO." Martin's stomach dropped. "Can they do that?" "Oh, they can try." Daniel tossed a 20 on the table and stood. "But they forgot one thing." "What's that?" A slow, dangerous smile. "My father is still a majority shareholder." The bell jingled again as they stepped back into the rain. Daniel turned up his collar against the downpour. "You coming, Riggs?" Martin hesitated. This wasn't his fight. He could walk away right now. Go back to his mop, his routine, his invisible life. But then he thought of Carla's voice. Worth it. He fell into step beside Daniel. Where to now? To see the only person who can stop this. Daniel flagged a cab with a sharp whistle. "We're going to Michigan." The taxi's tires hissed through the rain. Somewhere ahead, a storm was brewing, and for the first time in years, Martin Riggs felt wide awake. The rebellion. The old Cadillac rattled down the Tulane highway, its headlights cutting to the pre-dawn gloom of rural Michigan. Martin pressed his forehead against the cool glass of the passenger window, watching the endless parade of cornfields blur past. Somewhere in the back seat, Daniel's phone buzzed incessantly. Calls from aboard, from lawyers, from reporters who'd somehow caught wind of the brewing storm. Daniel ignored them all. His hands never wavered on the wheel. "He won't be happy to see me," Daniel muttered, more to himself than to Martin. Martin glanced at the GPS 12 more miles to the lake house. 12 more miles until they faced a man who'd built Summit Dynamics from nothing. Daniel's father, Robert Kressler, the legendary founder who'd walked away from his own company 5 years ago, leaving his only son to steer the ship. The radio crackled with static. A local news report cut through. "Breaking news from Chicago. where sources report stunning boardroom revolt at Summit Dynamics. Daniel slammed it off. The silence that followed was heavier than the humid August air. Martin studied the CEO's profile, the tight jaw, the dark circles under his eyes. This wasn't the polished executive from the boardroom anymore. This was a man running on desperation and black coffee. Why'd he leave? The question slipped out before Martin could stop it. Daniel's fingers flexed on the wheel. Same reason we're driving to Michigan at 4 a.m. He hated what the company was becoming. A bitter chuckle. Guess I should have listened. The Cadillac's tires crunched onto a gravel road. Through the trees, moonlight glinted off water. Then the house appeared, a sprawling log cabin perched on the edge of Lake Michigan, its windows dark. No, not entirely dark. A single light burned in the downstairs study. Daniel killed the engine. For a long moment, neither man moved. Somewhere on the lake, a loon called, a lonely, haunting sound. "Come on," Daniel said finally, pushing open his door. "Let's wake the dragon." Robert Kressler stood in the doorway like a gunslinger waiting for high noon. 70 years old, 6'3", with a shock of white hair and eyes that could strip paint. He took one look at his son and said, "You fucked up." Daniel didn't flinch. "Yeah, I did." Robert's gaze shifted to Martin. "Who's this?" "Martin Riggs. He's why I know how bad I fucked up." Something unreadable passed over the old man's face. Then he stepped aside. "Kitchen. Coffee's on." The house smelled of pine and old books. Martin followed the Kresslers past mounted fish and faded family photos. Daniel as a gap-toothed kid holding a baseball trophy, a younger Robert shaking hands with presidents. The kitchen was straight out of the 1970s, all orange laminate and chrome. Robert poured 3 mugs of coffee without asking how anyone took it. "Start talking," he growled. Daniel did. The merger, the hidden layoffs, the board betrayal. Martin watched as Robert's expression went from anger to something darker, a quiet, terrifying fury. When Daniel finished, Robert set his mug down with deliberate care. "You let them play you." "I know. You forgot whose name is on the goddamn building." "I know." Robert turned to Martin. "And you?" "Janitor." "Huh." Martin nodded. "Why'd you stick your neck out?" The answer came easier this time. "Because someone should." Robert studied him for a long moment. Then he pushed back from the table with a scrape of chair legs. "All right, here's how we burn this down." He crossed to an ancient filing cabinet, yanked open a drawer, and pulled out a battered manila folder. When he slapped it onto the table, Martin saw the label, Shareholder Agreement, Original. Daniel inhaled sharply. "You kept it." "Course I kept it." Robert flipped it open, revealing yellowed legal pages. Buried on page 87, majority shareholder can dissolve the board with 72 hours. Notice if there's evidence of malfeasance. His grin was all teeth. "And boys, we got malfeasance coming out our asses." Daniel reached for the document, but Robert snatched it back. "Not so fast. You want my help? You do this my way." "Which is?" "We hit them where it hurts." Robert pulled a flip phone from his pocket, the kind drug dealers use in movies. "First, we leak the real layoff numbers to the press. Then we get the unions involved. And then..." He dialed a number, held the phone to his ear. "Then we remind those Wall Street pricks what happens when you screw with the people who actually build things." Someone answered. Robert's voice changed, became the roar of a man half his age. "Jimmy, it's Bob Kressler. Round up the old crew. We're going to war." Martin looked at Daniel. Daniel looked back. Outside, the first light of dawn touched the lake. Somewhere in Chicago, a boardroom full of very rich men had no idea what was coming for them. The signing that never was. The Summit Dynamics headquarters looked like a war zone. Martin stood beside Daniel in the chaos of the 42nd floor lobby, watching through the floor-to-ceiling windows as news vans swarmed the building below. Reporters shouted into microphones. Camera flashes popped like fireworks. And just beyond the barricades, a sea of protesters, factory workers, office staff, even delivery drivers, chanted and waved handmade signs. No merger, no betrayal, Daniel's phone had been vibrating nonstop for hours. He finally silenced it and turned to Martin. "You ready for this?" Martin adjusted the unfamiliar tie around his neck. Borrowed from Daniel's emergency office stash. Not even a little. A door burst open down the hall. Richard Veldon stormed toward them, his custom suit rumpled, his face flushed with rage. 2 stone-faced security guards flanked him, Hernandez and another man Martin recognized from a night shift. "This is your doing," Richard spat, jabbing a finger at Daniel. "You turned this into a circus." Daniel didn't blink. "No, Richard. You did that when you decided to sell out our people." Richard's lip curled. "The vote's in 30 minutes. You're finished." Actually, a new voice cut through the tension. Robert Kressler stepped out of the elevator, looking every inch the titan of industry in his vintage Summit coveralls and steel-toed boots. Behind him trailed a dozen men and women in similar workwear, the old crew from the Gary plant, their faces lined with age but their eyes blazing. Richard paled. "Bob, you can't just—" "Majority shareholder privilege," Robert said cheerfully, slapping a thick legal binder against Richard's chest. "Page 87. Enjoy the read." The boardroom doors loomed ahead. As they pushed inside, Martin caught sight of the gleaming conference table, the same one he'd mopped around for years, now littered with abandoned coffee cups and the unsigned merger documents. The board members froze mid-conversation. "Meeting's adjourned," Robert announced. "Effective immediately, this board is dissolved pending investigation." Chaos erupted. Chairs screeched. Lawyers scrambled. One silver-haired director actually choked on his mineral water. Through it all, Daniel walked calmly to the head of the table. He didn't sit, just picked up the unsigned contract and tore it cleanly in half. The room went dead silent. "New vote," Daniel said. "All in favor of selling out our employees to line your pockets?" Not a single hand rose. "Didn't think so." Daniel turned to the stunned board. "Now get out. We've got a company to rebuild." 1 year later, Martin Riggs stood on the rooftop terrace of Summit Dynamics, squinting against the sunset. Below, the Chicago skyline glittered. Behind him, laughter and clinking glasses filled the air as employees celebrated their first year under the new employee ownership model. Daniel joined him at the railing, handing over a drink. "You ever get used to the view?" Martin smiled. "Nope." They clinked glasses. A year ago, Martin had been invisible. Now he wore a VP badge on his lapel, overseeing Summit's new worker advocacy division. The arthritis still flared up sometimes, but the company's new healthcare plan meant he could finally afford the treatments. Down on the street, a group of janitors, now shareholders, walked into the building with their heads held high. "Carla would have loved this," Martin said quietly. Daniel nodded. "Yeah, she would have." Inside, Robert Kressler was holding court with a crowd of factory workers, his booming laugh cutting through the music. The news playing on the monitors showed Summit stock price, up 18% since the restructuring. Proof, Martin thought, that doing the right thing didn't have to cost you. Sometimes it paid dividends. If this story inspired you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe. We got more real-life underdog stories coming your way. Who should we feature next? Let us know in the comments.